Hey, Russ.
Can't talk. Hat ate my soul.
Uh, well, if you can extract your soul from your hat, I have a Reddit question.
Oh God. All right, let me strap myself in.
It's not so bad.
Oh, okay.
So, someone wants to know, they say they were tasked to look through my school's archive for a project and got to look through a copy of Angelo's, and having started to read, seeing the panel on fencing against Hungarian saber, was curious seeing the person lean back, similar to what Timlick describes. I am curious if this is the case or stylistic choices. Would love to learn more about Austrian influence on British saber, especially after seeing AHF's, I can speak English, video on Roworth.
AHF's video on Roworth. Okay, so the AHF guys do absolute yeoman's work on Roworth and other British fencing. They're great. Let me talk about that position. We have covered this before, this old school fencing stance. Okay? Front foot's relatively light, back foot's relatively heavy, because if I'm on horseback and I'm turning to face my opponent, look where I am. This comes out of horseback fencing. It is related to, but not completely equivalent to, similar type stances you might see with rapier. Now, I do not have a big ass riding heel on the back of my left shoe, which means the angle of my knee will necessarily be different wearing a flat soled shoe than wearing a riding boot, right? If you are wearing a riding boot, this position is very well supported. The weight's not on the heel so much. And this front leg is forward. And one of the reasons that you're seeing it in Teamlik, Mr. Researchy dude out there on the internet, is that the Austro-Hungarians are really, really fond of this movement they call a demi-lunge. And that is, I'm here. Am I actually leaning backwards? Maybe, maybe not. But I can be here. I can be here by moving the pelvis in such a way that I shift over top of my base of support. Now, for those of you who are familiar with Feldman, fencing at the Teresian Academy, he goes into some detail in this, and his description of the body mechanics is excellent. But this ability to manipulate distance directly out of the pelvis is very common in Austro-Hungarian fencing. Where it originates, we do not know. Specifically because all of this stuff was very, very cosmopolitan. The Austro-Hungarian fencers were familiar with all the German corpus. They were familiar with all of the French and Italian corpus, and they were playing with and adding their own ideas in the process. That means you get a smorgasbord. You will see elements of Austro-Hungarian stuff that looks very, very French. You will see elements that look super whamodyne Italian. That's English, I tell you. And you'll see elements that literally look like they were ripped right out of Kunsteffektens. Like the first time I went to visit Stephen Hick and showed him some of our false edge techniques, and he said, "Cool Vinden. Where'd you learn those?" And I said, "What's a Vinden?" Because I hadn't started manuscript grubbing. He was how I got involved with the manuscript grubbers. Started pulling those things out of the archives. The important part here is that that does not answer your question about influences, because we can't yet answer your question about influences. We know Le Manchart took training gear, training ideas from the Austro-Hungarians. The Hatvagash in particular is a very East Central European thing, and we'll see circumstances later on, I won't steal thunder from a publication that's coming out, where it's not purely just a Hungarian thing. It's also traditional somewhere else. But in the meantime, what does Roworth do? We know he's combining with a bunch of stuff, and he puts out a manual, and I tend to refer to it as Baby Hungarian because it's built on that. But the British practice in there is also very, very real. It is a really good, as Corey and I once said, really good grilled cheese sandwich. There's non-basic stuff in there, but the basics are very solid. And the extent to which Roworth is building system, not just techniques, based on these movements, is a little bit dicey. You can't actually say he built the footwork on Hungarian movements. You can't really say he built the footwork on British movements, because these big broad brushes are meaningless. Lineages matter. So what you need to do is go back through what AHF has posted, look at the source material, and ask yourself the question, which chassis do you see? Which transmission do you see? Which engine do you see? And only after you figure out what the base mechanics are, do you then come to an understanding of where the actual functional influence is in the manuscript. Okay? And I'll give you an example. So if I am first position, second position, third position, I recover to first position. This is bog standard as classical British fencing as we've ever seen, unless I recover from the other guard, in which case I'm here, and I've recovered to first position here. This is absolute goddamn genius. It's deeply neglected in the British fencing literature, but it's doing something that's absolutely amazing. It is recovering and using this hip as a pintle mount to lock out anything that could come over here. And you'll see that in the plate you've asked about on Reddit. The British, not Austrian guy is standing here and his stance looks very relaxed. And it can be because mechanically I could throw a sledgehammer at this guard over here, it ain't getting through. And then I'm back out. The direct cut's super fast supported. Same thing here, but I'm going to fold in this shoulder. Now I've recovered. I could stop bricks on this, mechanically speaking. Nothing's getting through. It's super relaxed. And as much as it's criticized for being a kind of Ponzi dance that doesn't teach fencing, what it's really doing is teaching you to use this hip for power. It's amazing. And that's not what the Austro-Hungarians are doing. It's a different movement than the demi-lunge. They're both very cool, sophisticated movements, but they're different. Systems are not simply collections of techniques. They are ideas about how a person should move under pressure. Systems are inherently opinionated, and they must be inherently opinionated, or else they're not systems. They're what an old martial arts instructor I had 30 years ago, who's now passed, I think, called a dog from every county. It's just a bunch of techniques fighting with nothing that hangs them together. So you try to do this cool technique or this cool technique, but your transitions don't make sense. So you're always out of position and too slow, even though you have a grab bag of cool techniques that work when you're definitely directly set up for them. Kat, you're listening to this. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. Would you say it's sort of comparable to loving all the music styles, so you want to compose in country, jazz, metal, Baroque, and rap simultaneously?
It's like the kid's story about the kid who loved the muffins and tried to make the every flavor muffin.
Oh.
And what you get, of course, is a muffin that's truly awful. And the apprentice baker goes back to bed feeling very ashamed because the muffins are awful. So if you want to track influences and you don't have history by which to do it, drill it down, say, here, Roworth has these influences in his background. Which movement influences are informing what Roworth tells you to do? If you can do that, you can speak rigorously on the manual and understand what it's saying to do. Until you can do that, you are a neophyte at understanding the manuals, and there's nothing wrong with that. Read it very closely, read it very carefully, and look at the pictures on the assumption that they are correct. I have gone back and forth with this with so many scholars, those of us who are formally trained historians. You may have a reason for dismissing a picture, but you must have a reason for dismissing that picture. Until you do, that picture and that text together is God, and you listen to what is being depicted there, and you draw from it directly. It is correct until you have a rigorous reason why it must be, not can be, must be dismissed. All right, now I'm going to start academic ranting, and nobody wants that shit. So there's your answer. Have fun, go to the thing. Congratulations on martial arts scholarship. It is almost endlessly fascinating, and once you start adding the cultural and historical elements into it, as the AHF video so nicely points out, It winds up creating also connections in public to odd bedfellows. Like, who knew Roworth and Jane Austen were so tied at the hip? If you haven't seen it, go check that shit out. Academy, right? For historical fencing, they're famous. They're more famous than I ever will be. If you put that in your search bar, it will pull right up. It's a great video. All right, bye. We've got more videos and content coming, so if you liked what you saw and it was useful for you, please stab the like button, /subscribe, and punch the little bell icon so that you're notified immediately when new content comes available. Thanks, and go do the thing.